So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another pitch battle. This one's going to be on the same map actually as the second battle in the Gondorian two-parter, although this one is probably going to go in quite a similar way actually, because it is again fairly long for what is a 1v1 field battle, and it's on a the composition is going to be relatively similar because we're going to be seeing Arthur Dane in action today, so we're going to be seeing it from the perspective of Arthur Dane, played by Hunter Wayward. And Arthur Dane and Gondor obviously do have quite a lot of similarities to them. Again, a lot of the kingdoms of men, a lot of the good kingdoms of men at any rate, have got very similar things that they can all draw from, but there are differences, and I would say the main one is the fact that Arthur Dane certainly have the stronger cavalry all around, certainly the more versatile cavalry at any rate. You could certainly make a case for saying that Gondor's cavalry is strong, but it's in a very specific area. They've got good lancers, and their spear cavalry is okay, but for the most part Gondor's cavalry is based around doing damage off the charge and to augment their strong infantry. Whereas Arthur Dane rely a little bit more on their cavalry, to be fair. Their infantry, you tend to see Arthur Dane invest a lot more in some of their cheaper units, as Hunter has done here. He's gone for quite a few Evandem spearmen backed up by the Arthur Dane pikemen. The Arthur Dane phalanx is very tried and tested because it's very cost effective. It's made up of a lot of cheap units, but it will hold very well from the front. It's actually something very similar to what Cardland do a lot of the time, which obviously makes sense considering they are both Arnorian kingdoms. We'll go through the army composition in a little bit more detail of Arthur Dane here, and he's got some Evandem archers here at the front, and obviously the purpose of these cheap archers, quantity over quality, just to get as many arrows downrange and to absorb the initial arrow fire of the enemy. And obviously the Evandem archers do have those little shields on their back, but for the most part individually they're not going to stand up too well, but it is their numbers which gives them their strength. And obviously they don't have the highest missile damage. As a militia archer, they should have 4 missile damage, which puts them obviously on the lowest rung. Just in behind them, however, again, as I said, we have the Arthur Dane phalanx, which is made up of several units of Evandem spearmen to make up the bulk of this line, which also gives it its mass and makes it a little bit more difficult to push through. Because obviously unsupported pikes, the first thing people are going to do is just try and push through them and make sure the pikes cannot engage them how they want. But in the middle here, before we move on, we do have the Anuminous Gate Guards, which are not multiple HP pikes anymore as they have been in previous versions of the game. But they do have a morale boosting effect. They are very similar to Cardland's Wardens of Tyr and Gorthad. Arthur Dane are not quite as reliant on their morale buffing units as Cardland are, but considering Arthur Dane often do bring quite a lot of militia units to sort of bolster their numbers of infantry, to make up for the fact their cavalry is quite expensive, this is still an important factor you're going to have to bear in mind. Arthur Dane do share that weakness in a way, but it's only mainly because a lot of people tend to bring a lot of the lower tier units, which do still have not great morale, but still better than, overall Arthur Dane's morale is still going to be better than Cardland's. Back here we also have the Arthur Dane pikemen, and to continue that sort of comparison between Arthur Dane and Cardland, the Arthur Dane pikemen can have their armour upgraded as they have here. They've got the breastplates on, which makes them just that little bit tougher. The Greenwatch Garrison footmen are very numerous, but they are sort of on the similar sort of tier to sort of like the cheaper pikes. Are obviously going to be terrible at taking archer fire. Not to say that the Arthur Dane pikemen are particularly good at it, but the increased armour values do make them a little bit more sturdy, so really it kind of depends on what sort of engagement you're expecting. We do have the layered skirmish line, so just in behind the Evandem archers are going to be taking the first engagement from the enemy archers, and then we're going to be seeing the Arthur Dane marksmen in action. So we've got the breastplates again equipped on the Arthur Dane marksmen. Interestingly enough, they will actually do quite well in a skirmish fight, so if the enemy are doing something similar, this sort of layered skirmish approach, which is fairly common now, then Arthur Dane marksmen should be able to handle sort of a second round of skirmish fighting. And Arthur Dane really do kind of need to win the skirmish fight, otherwise they'll find themselves in a little bit of trouble if the enemy still has ammunition left to start focusing down some of their pike units. And then we've got 2 units here of very elite infantry. The Wardens of the North can kind of count as that. We've got 1 unit of dismounted Knights of Illuminus, obviously one of the strongest sword and board units in the game. Very, very tough. Again, they're not really focused around dealing damage particularly quickly, like sort of two-hander, multiple HP units, but the dismounted Knights of Illuminus are obviously going to be very, very difficult to beat unless you can sort of surround and overwhelm them. And then the Wardens of the North, this is where the General's going to be hanging out. They do make good infantry. They've obviously got their long swords they pull out in melee, and they're pretty damn good. But the main reason you're going to bring the Wardens of the North is obviously that they are one of the very few AP archers in the game. So if you've got a group of knights which keeps buzzing around your lines, you're going to force them to commit to something they probably don't want to if you've got the Wardens of the North, because slowly over time those AP arrows are going to find their mark and do some serious damage. Very good at hunting down single targets, the AP archers, and afterwards they do make pretty good infantry as well, which is obviously a plus. And then on both sides, well actually over here, Covering the flanks we have some Dunedain Peacekeepers. As I've said before, the Dunedain more akin to the Elves maybe in the fact that they've got better skill, which means the Spear Malice is not quite so keenly felt on units like the Dunedain Peacekeepers, but obviously they don't have the highest armour either. Their morale is very high. But obviously that is something to bear in mind. They can do pretty well in melee, but they do sort of pay a price for it in other areas, and obviously you pay a price in the fact that Dunedain units tend to be quite expensive. And then another unit over here guarding the flank, and then finally we have the sort of hidden battalions over here. Again, a lot of Dunedain. These units are all hiding, so we've got 2 units of Dunedain Troll Slayers, which overall, one of my favourite units in the game just from a personal perspective, not because of their effectiveness, although they are very effective and very important to Arthedain as well, because they make one of the few, or maybe even, well, other than the Wardens of the North and a couple of other things that you can do, obviously the armour-piercing charge of several Lancers, one of Arthedain's only AP options, both with their Javelins and then when they pull out their Battle Axes in melee, obviously that gives them some AP too. Really a very important unit for Arthedain if they're going to be going up against heavily armoured factions. Obviously you want to keep them hidden until enemy archers have expended all their ammo. Otherwise they will fall away pretty quickly with their light armour. I think they're still multiple HP though, so that might be that's obviously something that's very much in their favour. Then we've got some Grey Company, Mounted Rangers, obviously the Grey Company. They have technically been in the game ever since Vanilla, back when they were Eriador's really only standout unit. But nowadays, obviously the Grey Company, they take after the Rangers. They can hide anywhere, which is pretty much well, Scouts can do it and Mounted Rangers can do it. Other than that, all Cavalry cannot hide anywhere. Obviously the Grey Company, as Mounted Rangers, they have the body piercing, but as with all Horse Archers, especially with Rangers, because they've got very little in the way of defences, they're going to have to watch out for being zoned out by enemy Foot Archers who've got good range, because they'll fall away very quickly. And then just in behind them, we have the Foot Rangers, the Dunedain Rangers. Oh, hang on a minute, these trees are... that won't do at all. Back up to high. There we go. So, the Dunedain Rangers, obviously just the foot variant, and obviously body piercing as well, so obviously he's hoping that these units will go unseen until the late game when he can sort of swing in from the side. Now again, as with this map, it offers you plenty of opportunities to hide, and whoever deploys on this side has got that advantage squarely in their favour. Looks like we're going to be involved in a pretty hefty skirmish, because we're going to be seeing Dale for the first time in quite a while, as Corrigan again, who's playing on this map. It was him who was playing as Umbar last time when we saw him just lose to Gondor. We'll see if he has better luck this time against Arthedain. Dale can certainly mix it in a skirmish fight with Arthedain. With the right composition, they'd win that. Obviously Dale with the good archers, and obviously the King Brand, or at least the Dalian General, is going to be in the Blackshot Dragon Slayers. The Blackshots can't actually hide, so it wouldn't have mattered if the General was in this unit or not. They would have stood out. But the rest of the Dalian army is not here yet, so we shall see what they have brought as the battle goes along. But for now, let's begin. And the onus is probably going to be on Arthur. Well, actually, no, Dale are probably going to be moving forward here. We can see some Bardian Marksmen have already revealed themselves. They do not have the armour upgrade, but that's not really the biggest loss in the world. The Bardian Marksmen are very, very strong in terms of their survivability, very akin to the Abrazani Nadubawi. Obviously, the Bardian Marksmen have been a unit ever since Vanilla, but we scarcely see them anymore, because Dale aren't really that popular to play. At least I haven't seen them in many of the things I've been sent. Interestingly enough as well, I'm actually running out of smaller scale battles like 1v1s, 2v2s, or field battles in general, so if you want to send me some field battles, that would be greatly appreciated. I do still have quite a few sort of larger scale battles, but I do want to sort of intersperse things as we go along, so if anyone's got any good field battles they want to send me, that would be much appreciated. We've got some Lake Town Bowmen here at the front, so obviously Dale, we're seeing all of their archers already showing themselves. Lake Town Bowmen, the lower end of Dale's archers, going to be very similar to what the Evendim archers offer Arthedain. Unfortunately for Corrigan, this unit of Lake Town Bowmen is going to find itself accosted by all of the Arthedain units, I think. All of the Evendim archers are going to be focusing down this singular unit of Lake Town Bowmen, although immediately the Dalian Marksmen also reveal themselves, and another unit of Lake Town Bowmen, so it's unsurprising here that Dale have invested so heavily in their archers. Mainly because when you're facing off against... Well, hello, the Grey Company have gotten into range here. That could potentially be a bit of a mistake. What are they actually shooting at? They're just shooting into the Dalian skirmish line. They need to be careful. If the Blackshots see them, the Blackshots will probably focus them down, I would imagine. The Grey Company are an expensive unit, an important target to bring down. But yeah, if you're playing as Dale against Arthedain, I would suggest that it's very, very likely that you're going to want the skirmish advantage, because it's one of the few areas in which Dale can press home a real advantage. And Arthedain skirmishers are honestly really good themselves, but they tend to rely a little bit more on their Dunedain Rangers and stuff like their Wardens of the North, which aren't necessarily the most heavily armoured units, so Dale can often win that battle of attrition, but you have to invest in your archer line a lot. And this is obviously going to leave you a little bit undermanned when it comes to your infantry. Having said that, they shouldn't have too much issue facing off against Evandim's Spearman. Now Corrigan, using a very similar tactic actually that we saw before, he's going to pull his archers back, and he's got his Lake Town River Patrol in behind them. Cheaper javelins, which could do some pretty nasty damage to stuff like the Arthedain Pikemen. You probably don't want to use javelins on Evandim's Spearman, if you can help it. Evandim's Spears are the sort of thing you can clean up in melee with just about anything. More Bardian Marksmen back here, so a very layered skirmish approach. The Earls of Esgaroth are on the field, which they are a unit of the same sort of calibre of the Guardians of Khan Doom and the Castamir's Legion, an expensive sword and board unit, which can often secure you the quality advantage on the front line, but the quantity advantage is another matter entirely. Whereas Umbar and Angmar can sort of support that with a lot of fodder, Dale don't have the same luxuries. You've got to be a little bit more savvy with what you're doing. Oh, hello. And Arthedain have moved forward pretty aggressively here at this point. You can see the Dunedain Peacekeepers getting into the Blackshot Dragon Slayers, but the Blackshots are very strong in melee, needless to say. But again, it's almost it's like deja vu, this. Very similar so far this has gone, because the Dalian front line is sort of being rolled over by Arthedain, but you'd imagine as time goes on that some of the attrition that Arthedain are taking on their forward advance will be felt pretty keenly. Arthedain's Evandim's Spears, how on earth did they get all the way around here? Well, this is going to be bad news for them, because they did manage to circumvent all these defences and get to the Lake Town Archers, but they're going to be charged in the back. They are spearmen, so when they turn around, they'll start doing some damage, but they might break here, because that was a lethal charge from the Dalian Cavalry, and they do break. Dalian Cavalry, very fast-moving lancers. Similar sort of thing to the Serpent Guard, although not quite as good, I believe. It's all much of a muchness when you speak of those fast-moving lancers. They're used for pretty much exactly the same thing. The Barding Herd are being overwhelmed by all of these Arthedain pikemen, and again, this layered defence. I've spoken about layered defences quite a bit in the last few battles, I must say, and layered defences can work as long as you only have a few layers. If you have sort of a lot of layers with only like a few defenders on each, it doesn't tend to work out too well. Having said that, these Illuminous Gate Guards are very stretched at this point in time. We've also got some Swordmasters of Karnan here in the middle. Now, the Illuminous Gate Guards are not in a good formation here, so as they pass through these Zweihander-wielding Swordmasters, they're probably not going to have that good a time, although the Swordmasters are also finding themselves the target of the Arthedain skirmishers, which is completely unsurprising. But the Dalian front line has held, and once again, Corrigan's first line fell apart very quickly, but this time he did retreat at the very least and didn't get crushed. This time, the Barding Herd are his secondary line, and Arthedain will probably struggle a little bit to get through this with their composition. I mean, the Pikes will do well, but only over a long period of time, and the Barding Herd are a polearm unit which can survive under arrow fire for a fair amount of time. This is where Dale's high armour values will really come into play. Having said that, Dismounted Knights of Illuminus are a tough cookie to bring down, even with the AP that a halberd gives you. This is pretty chaotic at this point in time. The Dalian Cavalry has been continuing to cycle charge, although they need to be really careful about cycle charging into pikes. It's paid off here. They managed to rout these Arthedain pikemen who got a little bit too greedy, and I think this is where Hunter is coming unstuck a little bit here. I think he's very eager to shut down the Dalian skirmishers who fell back behind the defensive lines. Which means Corrigan's plan could be working so far, because Arthedain are moving forward with real haste, but they're starting to get picked off by the Cavalry and Dale's archers. Having said that, the Illuminous Gate Guards have now sort of got themselves into a better formation. They're a little bit less all over the place. Some of them are more isolated, but they are now fighting alongside the dismounted Knights of Illuminas. Let's not forget as well that Arthedain still have all of those Ranger units left to commit. The Dunedain Troll Slayers are, well, actually they have been committed. The Dunedain Troll Slayers into melee. Whether they use their javelins or not remains to be seen. I think they got a couple of volleys off based on the densely packed pile of corpses there, but that certainly isn't all their ammunition. Now, the Earls will struggle in melee against the Dunedain Troll Slayers, but it's probably better than just letting them have free reign and throwing their jabbies. Over here, meanwhile, Lake Town River Patrol also facing off against the Troll Slayers, although the Troll Slayers need to be careful because they're in danger of really being overwhelmed at this point. Here we can see the Earls of Dale and the Dalian Cavalry getting around to the flank. The Dunedain Rangers might be out of ammunition here if they're being committed to melee against Earls. But it's a rare situation actually that Arthedain find themselves at the mercy of Dale when it comes to a cavalry fight. Dale's cavalry is traditionally very defensive, with the Earls being sort of the centrepiece of that. You know, and then the Dalian cavalry getting in charges where they can, but Arthedain usually have got the tools. You know, the Knights of Illuminus are something which Dale, outside of units like the Black Shots, can struggle to deal with. The Earls of Dale won't do so well if the Knights of Illuminus get a nice charge on them. Mounted Knights of Illuminus, I should say. But this time, Arthedain are not really even contesting the cavalry fight. Now, their saving grace here may very well be the fact that they've got so many pikes in their army. Because if Corrigan continues to charge his Dalian cavalry in like this, you would imagine that over time, attrition will probably start to tell. Lake Town pikemen are routing. It's really chaos. This sort of tactic, which Corrigan seems to be quite fond of, makes things a little bit difficult to keep track of under a tree line, which honestly is something which Dale would probably be using to their advantage in this sort of situation, because Arthedain were the aggressors, and Arthedain have already lost track of a few units which promptly got charged in the rear by Dalian lancers. Numinous Gate Guards. The pikes are having a bit of a torrid time at this point in time. You know, you can see that all of the archers pretty much that Dale managed to retreat backwards are focusing down units like the Gate Guards. And this is really where an Arthedain phalanx becomes a little bit unstuck, when it becomes very disorganised like this, because at this point in time I think Arthedain are probably going to be pretty reliant on individual elite units doing the work for them, and their skirmishers, because their pikes and their spears probably won't live to see the end of this battle. Meanwhile, the dismounted Knights of Illuminus here are all too happy to continue wrapping up the line made up of these Barding Herd, and the Barding Herd will rout pretty soon. Overwhelming force. The dismounted Knights of Illuminus taking some shots in the back from the Lake Town bowmen, but even without the shield value, the multiple HP and the very thick armour that they wear should be enough to see them through that. Dunedain Trollslayers getting away. The Dunedain Rangers, however, with their backs to the Elves of Askaroth, slowly but surely being killed off. And over here we can see that the Dunedain Trollslayers taking no prisoners against the Lake Town River Patrol. This, I think, is probably the weakness to this sort of strategy that Corrigan is using. He's got a lot of units which you can't really afford to move, but just over here a lot of his units desperately need support. Oh, and hello, the Blackshot Dragon Slayers. The Dunedain Trollslayers, which were taken off the engagement with the Earls, now using what's left of their javelins to throw them into the Blackshot Dragon Slayers, although the Earls of Dale were hidden just meters away in the trees, which is no good for the Dunedain Trollslayers. It could have been worse, though. It could have been a unit of Lancers which was hidden there, and then the Dunedain Trollslayers probably would have been destroyed. But as melee cavalry, the Earls, not the most devastating, as the Dunedain Trollslayers will give as good as they get in melee with those axes. Things are starting to settle down a little bit in terms of the battle now. Things are a little bit less all over the place, although Arthedain is still trying to sort of circumvent the Dalian defences, and at this point in time it is going to be Dale relying pretty much entirely on their ability to skirmish down these individual Arthedain units, pick them off where they can. These Arthedain pikemen are shaken. They've taken a lot of damage from arrow fire thus far. Bardian marksmen about to be accosted by Evendim spears. Obviously the Evendim spears, I can't imagine they'll last too long here with their lower morale. They've got no one around them either. They're hideously isolated back here, but it's not the end of the world for Hunter. If he can just stop these archers from firing for a time, he'll be in a pretty good place, because he's still got his full skirmish line. Dale have had to use all their archer ammunition on other things, and now Arthedain will be able to use their skirmishers. Of course, the flip side to that is Dale still have some lancers which they can use to go after the archers without any sort of resistance, considering the Arthedain pikes have taken some pretty substantial losses at this point, and now the Earls of Dale using their mass, and that's going to be the end of the Dunedain Trollslayers. So they were able to withstand one charge from the melee cavalry, but repeated charges have led to the end of the Dunedain Trollslayers, and the Blackshots are still alive. Dale's cavalry here is going to need to be utilised in order for them to win this fight, however, because most of the units they've got left are archers, and against things like Wardens of the North in melee, they are going to be no good. They do still have a few units of infantry, to be fair. These Elves of Askaroth are no pushovers, but they're also being surrounded. Evendim archers probably out of ammunition, now just being sent forward. Some Swordmasters of Karnan, which was saved. So yeah, I think, well, this is going to be a nasty charge. This is going to be the end of these Evendim spears. again, if Hunter doesn't have any answer to these marauding units of Dalian Lancers, this could turn pretty ugly. He does still have his Arthedain Marksmen that still have ammo though. So the archery advantage at this point will be his, because Dale at this point cannot keep all their archers firing, because all of these Arthedain infantry units are catching up to them in melee. Meanwhile, if we have a look over here, the Barding Herd, slowly but surely, have just been eaten alive by the Evendim Spears, and the Dismounted Knights of Venumna still in pretty good health, honestly, and that's a unit which Dale will probably struggle to take down without sort of charging them with cavalry. Lake Town Pikes also finding the Wardens of the North a little bit too much to handle. At this point it looks as though Arthedain only have one unit of Arthedain Marksmen left with ammunition. They've committed this one to melee. And at this point numbers are going to be Arthedain's friend, although the Lake Town River Patrol still have some javelins. I'm not sure whether Dale have got the resources left to take down everything that Arthedain have left. It's going to be tricky. I mean, the cavalry can certainly do it if they're used wisely. We shall see. Don't know if the Black Shots still have ammunition or not, but the Wardens of the North are getting ever closer to them. Earlier on I said the Dunedain units tend to have less armour, but I think the Wardens of the North actually do have decent armour values, in spite of them looking very similar. They do still they have a few more metal plates. They are certainly the most lightly armoured of the three armour-piercing archers, however the Black Shots are significantly more heavy duty, as are the Temple Guard. Blackshot Dragon Slayers with their handheld Wind Lancers doing what they can. This cavalry is going to be fairly difficult to deal with. 2 units of Dalian Lancers, Swordmasters of Karnan. I'm not sure whether Arthedain have really got anything left that they can use to cover their rear. I mean, the Troll Slayers could be such a thing. Getting into the Black Shots, maybe? I think they are. That's a charge as well, so the Black Shots certainly won't like being charged by a unit like that. And this could be the end of them, unless they're reinforced quickly by the Swordmasters, in which case Dale will win that fight fairly handily. Meanwhile, the Earls of Escaroth, fighting hard here in the middle, but ultimately just overwhelmed from sheer numbers. Arthedain have used up all their skirmish ammunition at this point. This Lake Town River Patrol is not going to hold up long. The Arthedain Marksmen with that armour. Obviously the Lake Town River Patrollers, lower tier javelins, being in melee is not really where they want to be. Cheap and effective though, if used correctly, but the Dalian Cavalry is getting ready to recharge this area, it looks like, which is no good for Arthedain. Arthedain have got a lot of numbers left though. Guardian Marksmen still have ammo, as do the Black Shots. The Black Shots are starting to fire into this area which is charging through. The Earls of Escaroth actually routing. And this is the problem. Dale are starting to run low on manpower and morale could become an issue in that case. Those Earls might come back. There go the Dalian Marksmen. There's still a long way to go in this fight though, in spite of the fact we are most of the way through. Arthedain are significantly further ahead, but you have to remember that a lot of their units consist of Evendim Archers and Arthedain Marksmen without any ammunition left, and Dale have cavalry, so it's still very, very close. The Swordmasters of Karnan, victory seems certain for them, although that's probably not going to last too much longer with the Wardens of the North coming to the aid of their Dunedain brethren. And yeah, this is what I would be really worried about if I were Arthedain, this big blob of cavalry. The Earls are not easy to take down, and the Dalian Cavalry have got a really nice charge on them. What are they caught back here? Whatever they've caught, it's dead. Just what's left of the Rangers. If they still had ammunition, that's a big catch, but they did have their swords out earlier, so it's entirely possible that Arthedain expended all that ammunition. Here we can see the pikemen getting ready to surround this Lake Town River Patrol, trying to deal with what pockets of resistance of Dale are still further forward on the battlefield. The fact that Arthedain still have their pikes left is important. They definitely want to preserve the lives of their pikes if they can, because that will make Dale's cavalry much less scary to deal with later on. Meanwhile, dismounted Knights of the Numinas. The Earls of Escaroth did come back from routing, but they're not likely to stay there for too much longer. There was a time back in Vanilla when this would have been a closer fight than it is now, but the dismounted Knights of Luminous are now substantially better than the Earls. Those Black Shots still have ammunition, they're running around all over the place. 16 of them left alive. Yeah, the dismounted Knights of Luminous, they're going to be a tough nut to crack, although no support here. The cavalry could rear charge them, and you know, with how long they've been fighting already, the hit points probably won't save them from a charge. Here we can see the Bardian Marksman. Traditionally they make a pretty good makeshift line infantry unit, but in this situation the numbers have really worked against them. Although this could be pretty nasty for Arthedain. Again, more rear charges from that cavalry. Earls of Dale coming in. Evandem Spearmen routing. A lot of these Arthedain militia units just routed off. That's a significant development in this fight now. Arthedain do need to be careful, because if they spread themselves too thin and try and engage everything Dale has, the cavalry will pick them off. But if they don't try and engage these archers, then obviously the archer ammunition will still find its mark, and that will still do damage over time. As Dalian cavalry is still further at the back, being hunted by the Innuminous Gate Guards. That's a big rout, that, for Arthedain. There goes the Arthedain general as well. The cluster of resistance that's over here, the Wardens of the North. That was an unfortunate loss, actually, because the Wardens of the North are still pretty healthy. They lose their general, but honestly this might be worthwhile, because they're going to be silencing a unit of Dalian cavalry at this point. And without lancers, I don't see how Dale can dig themselves out of the numbers discrepancy they are in. Obviously the combination of AP from the Dunedain Shoal Slayers, and then the skill from the longswords of the Wardens of the North, working very much in favour of Arthedain there. The Black Shots are now in melee, facing the dismounted Knights of Innuminus. Now this could be pretty key here. Will this charge do substantial damage? If Dale can shut down these dismounted Knights of Innuminus, that is a big unit they've managed to kill off. They killed a lot of them. They're wavering as well. It takes a lot to rout the dismounted Knights of Innuminus off, even in this sort of situation. This might be enough to turn this fight around, and the Black Shots are no slouches in melee. If they can sort of get to an even number in this fight, they'll be able to give as good as they get. There's some Dalian Marksmen over here, and certainly what's left of the Dalian skirmish line is the best thing to deal with these Arthedain pikemen at this point. And Hunters probably starting to sweat at this point. Arthedain are not really in the ascendancy in the way that they used to be. Here come the Earls of Dale charging in there. There goes the Dalian general though. The Earls of Dale and their charge not enough to save the Black Shots, as they were completely surrounded by a bunch of Arthedain foot soldiers. Arthedain Marksman back there. I don't know, it's going to be tricky. I mean, the Earls of Dale are tough to bring down, but they also need the Dalian infantry to still be somewhat intact. And that probably is not the case anymore. There's still this Dalian cavalry. Slightly concerning with how much time is left in this battle. Probably what's going to happen, there's going to be sort of a substantial game of cat and mouse between Arthedain's infantry and what's left of Dale's cavalry. Dalian Marksmen actually did not rout. Here come the Dalian cavalry charging into the Evandem Spearmen, doing substantial damage to them. Not enough to rout them off though, so the inspiration bone. I'm sure the Wardens of the North as a general's bodyguard unit get an inspiration aura, which is probably what saved the Evandem Spears from routing there. The axe-wielding Dalians are not going to be a match for dismounted Knights of Innuminus and Wardens of the North. Here comes the Earls of Dale. Charging in, there go the Dalian cavalry as well. And these charges are going to be what decides this battle. But I think Arthedain should be just about okay. It's going to be tricky actually. I mean, there's still a lot of Earls there. Do Arthedain have anything left they can use? I mean, these Evandem Spears might come back. They've got some Innuminous Gate Guards sort of waddling around. This is going to be, I think, the story of the battle as it unfolds now. Will those Dalian Marksmen come back? Probably not. Numbers like that. Charging into something there. I think they're just trying to finish off routing units at this point to make sure Arthedain don't get any additional support. But now, the chaos of the early battle has subsided, and we are now going to get a game of cat and mouse, which, you know, if things get, you know, bogged down in sort of the drudgery of trying to chase the cavalry around the field with infantry, then I will sort of make a cut. But where did the That's the Earls. Whatever happened to the other unit of Dalian Cavalry? I guess it must be hidden. Oh, there it is. So a unit of 14 Dalian Cavalry and a unit of 31 Earls of Dale against what remains of the Arthedain infantry line. Now, are they going to be able to get their Numinous Gate Guards back? Where did they go? Evandem Spears. Did they manage to get them back over here? When I wasn't looking, they did. So this essentially is going to be the end as we know it. And it comes down to a gentleman's agreement at this point. I mean, personally, I believe that at this point in time, the onus is on the player with the cavalry to charge in. Purely because, you know, at this point in time, you know, the infantry player can't do anything else other than just sort of box up and try and take the charges as they come. Which is probably what they're going to do now. Arthedain Marksman routing, which is not the best start for Arthedain. They need these. They need the numbers here to sort of remain as they are. The Dalian Cavalry took a pretty hefty beating from that, though. But I think that's the end of all the pikes. The Earls of Dale did not take too much in the way of casualties, however. I'm struggling to see where an extra 10k frames comes from. You know, that's like the final stand portion of a scenario. Well, the Arthedain announcer feels fairly confident, but I think that's because of the value of the units they have left. The Wardens of the North and Dismounted Knights of Numinous skew that a little bit with how much they are worth. Whereas the Earls of Dale and the Dalian Cavalry are technically lesser units, although the Dalian Cavalry is basically defunct at this point. And it might be that the Earls of Dale and their lack of a charge bonus might be Arthedain's saving grace here. Although continued charges like this are certainly not going to go too well for Arthedain. It's a very close fight, this, though. Another very close run thing. Honestly, I mean, based on how many kills they're getting per charge, you would actually back the Earls of Dale to go on to win this, but it kind of depends. There's a Knight of Numinous just charging after them. What a brave lad. He's getting in the way of this charge. With these continuing sandwich charges, you would imagine that Arthedain probably won't be able to see this out. And if that was the case, that's kind of a lesson in the fact that if you surrender the cavalry game completely, this is the sort of thing that can happen. Because Arthedain were both aggressive and they didn't have any cavalry to cover their backlines, or sort of any cavalry to pressure the enemy's backlines to sort of force Dale's cavalry to be a little bit more defensive. It's not often you'll see Dale on the offensive quite so much with their cavalry. You know, their cavalry is sort of, especially with the Earls of Dale, seems very geared towards defending your skirmish line from enemy cavalry. And the Dalian Cavalry, then you can sort of send out individual units to sort of pressure the enemy backlines while the Earls are dealing with the enemy cav. But here it was all-out aggression from Dale because they had nothing that could stand in their way. At this point we have one Knight of Numinous and the rest made up entirely of Wardens of the North. Let's go to ×2 speed. Dalian Cavalry actually charging into the Knight of Numinous there. Who's going to win this epic encounter? That was another nice charge, actually, although the Earls taking some pretty nasty damage there. And inflicting basically nothing on the Wardens of the North, which could be a taste of things to come. It may be that the Wardens of the North are just too strong. Hold up. This horseman over here still has this one knight. Okay. There's a decent charge here, and they've actually turned their backs to the Earls at this point. Now they're going to turn back around. Wardens of the North are taking losses every charge, but so are the Earls. It's going to be tricky. They took a fair amount of casualties on that charge, as did the Earls, but I think the Wardens of the North are going to take this, though, based on how much damage the Earls are taking after each charge. I think the Wardens will be able to pull this out, unless they all get flattened in a single charge. I'm very confused as to how this battle is going to last so long. Now they're exhausted. They still have that one Knight of Numinous as well. Wild card. a very strange end to this battle, considering how hectic it was early on. I was expecting, honestly, with the length of this battle, I was expecting an elongated skirmish fight, especially considering the two factions involved being Arthedain and Dale, two factions which can definitely engage in that sort of warfare quite successfully. But as it was, Arthedain were much more aggressive than I expected them to be early on, considering they had the definitely the phalanx-like composition of their infantry with the Evendim spears and all the pikes. But they moved forward quickly. And I think that, the Barding Herd layer was a little bit more difficult to get through, but they managed it in the end. The Dalian skirmishers definitely took their toll on the Arthedain army. Now this, I would say, is maybe a little bit unsportsmanlike, parking themselves in the stakes, considering how much damage they would... Yeah, and this is probably why it's lasting so long. It's, the Dalian player is probably extremely reluctant to charge headlong into the spikes, but actually the ones of the north are able to hide at this point as well, considering the general is dead. Yeah, this is probably why this battle is going to take so long. So I will make a bit of a cut as the players decide what it is they want to do. Well, here we go, the final engagement. And interestingly enough, as long as the Earls walk out of this engagement, they won't actually take damage from the spikes, and as long as they charge through this direction, they'll be okay, but walking out of the fight is the problem. The longer they stay in contact with the Wardens, it's going to be all over. I think regardless, honestly, the Wardens would probably win against the Earls at this point. Even numbers, they've withstood the charges thus far. And also, I mean... I did say earlier that the onus is on the cavalry player to sort of make the plays late on, when it's like a pure cavalry sort of, what's left of your army is only cavalry against what's left of the enemy army is only infantry. If you're the cavalry army, it's up to you to make the move. But you're also well within your rights to be rather annoyed if the infantry player just sort of parks themselves in stakes, because there's really nothing you can do in many situations other than just sort of charge in and either leave yourself there or walk away, which either option is not too appealing, and it's possible actually that the Dalian player might just admit defeat here and not give the Arthedain player the satisfaction of killing his Earls off in melee. Based on the amount of time left, I think that's what's probably going to happen. Both times we've seen this sort of fight, it's very similar to the Gondor-Umbar fight we saw previously, only this time, well, it worked out pretty much in exactly the same way, only this time it was sort of cavalry versus infantry left at the end, whereas before obviously it was a pike block. Yeah, and Dale admitted defeat. Again, I imagine Corrigan probably wasn't too happy at the end of this fight, mainly because I think the Wardens of the North would have won anyway. So I think it would have been interesting to see whether or not they would have, and I think that would have been the sporting thing to do there at the end, was to sort of have the Earls charge in and then potentially leave them there. And sort of see as they duke it out. I think the Wardens of the North would have won it fine. I don't think Hunter needed to resort to putting himself within the stakes in such a manner. But even so, it was very close, very well played by both sides. And despite the fact that both times Corrigan has tried this particular tactic and it's failed, it's been a very entertaining fight both times nonetheless. And I think both times it's come down to the fact that he's pulled back his skirmishers from the front line, and he's had sort of a sacrificial line there. Whereas I don't think that's really necessary. I think you can afford to have just one solid front line that the enemy has to move into after you pull back. There has to be a little bit of sort of... You can't just make it so obvious, I suppose. And this sort of tactic probably wouldn't work on a map where you didn't have quite so much tree cover and you couldn't hide quite so much, because the enemy would see it from a mile away and not advance into you. But even so, I think maybe having a little bit less in terms of sacrificial units would work, because particularly in the Umbar fight, we saw the Belagire footmen basically were just there to die. This fight actually worked out a little bit better for him, but in the end his infantry just wasn't up to snuff. But that's not really down to him, that's more down to the fact that Arthedain's phalanx is going to be able to beat an army that's mainly skirmishers in melee, and there were only a few Earls of Esgaroth and Swordmasters of Carnan, and they weren't in great enough numbers to turn that fight around, and the dismounted Knights of Annúminas and Wardens of the North in particular proved to be an obstacle too far, but still very well played. Let's see what did the damage for Arthedain, and obviously the Wardens of the North both in melee and at range, did some substantial damage. The Troll Slayers as well with 344 kills, so they did do a substantial amount of damage both with javelins and their battle axes. The Illuminous Gate Guards, despite not having a very good looking engagement, sort of being scattered all around the place, they still did very well for themselves. Dismounted Knights for Numinous doing well. Arthedain Pikemen doing okay. The Dunedain Rangers actually didn't do so well. They got caught early on. They charged in, presumably before using their ammunition, and then slowly but surely got slaughtered. Dunedain Peacekeepers didn't have the best of engagements either. They did charge right into the Barding Herd when they had their Halberds down, which even with their lower armour values is not really an engagement they're going to enjoy too much when they're unsupported. Everdom Spearmen doing okay. Grey Company not doing so well, but so the Rangers actually not doing so well in this fight, but the melee infantry and sort of the units that you associate with being stronger in melee were definitely the thing which gave Arthedain the edge here, because Dale really didn't have too much of an answer for Arthedain's elite infantry in this case. We didn't see anything like the Girions Paladins, for example, to stop the Dismounted Knights of Numinous, or even just more Barding Herd. A stronger line, I think, or at least stronger infantry units would have helped Corrigan here. But the Cavalry certainly did very well for Dale, and if it wasn't for that, Dale probably would have struggled a substantial amount more. So yeah, that was definitely a very enjoyable fight. Again, as I said, if anyone's got any good field battles that they want me to showcase, do send them to me, because I am actually running out. I think I've only got one more that would be relevant, without sort of going back quite a long way in my backlog, and that would involve some research. Again, like I said, I've got some larger scale battles that I can show off, but I do want to show off field battles as well, because like with this one, and with the two Gondorian ones, it opens your sort of battles up to be a little bit more. You see a lot more in terms of tactics diversity, and I think that's a good thing to see. And in particular, Corrigan's tactics in both of these battles, while it hasn't been successful, it's still been interesting to see. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next, which will probably be Toll for Lass, which we haven't seen in a while.